In part 6, we will look at measuring the unmeasurable, the assessment challenge of entrepreneurial education. There are a couple of common methods for assessing entrepreneurial education. The most common ones are thought-based, which means that you give a questionnaire to people and ask them what they think about their entrepreneurial knowledge, skills and attitudes before and after the education. And then you try to see the difference between these two measurements. And you check that with a control group. Another common way of assessing entrepreneurial education is to look at the actions people take after the education, pretty long time after the education. Then you look at actual entrepreneurial behavior. When it comes to the thought-based strategy for assessment, it's often based on the theory of planned behavior. This theory stipulates that entrepreneurial attitudes impact the entrepreneurial intentions of people, and that intentions also impact the entrepreneurial behavior of people. And what you measure is basically the attitudes and intentions, and by that way you can get a proxy for how will they behave. So basically, I can be entrepreneurial or an entrepreneur, I want to be an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial, leads to intentions, I'm planning to be an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial, which in turn impacts that I am an entrepreneur, that you become an entrepreneur, or that I was entrepreneur or entrepreneurial. There are some problems with both the thought and action-based assessment strategy. The thought-based strategies are easy to use. You can give out thousands of questionnaires to people. But unfortunately, convincing and useful results are scarce. This method for assessing entrepreneurial education is taken from natural sciences toolbox, but it doesn't work so well on education, where meaning is very important for people and social sciences in general. And also the problem is that this method only tells us if learning outcomes are reached. It doesn't answer the question of how they are reached, when they are reached, and why they are reached. We don't get into the black box of what is actually happening in the education. There is also a high risk for self-selection bias of entrepreneurial people choosing entrepreneurial education. The problems with action-based strategies are a little bit different. It's quite easy to see if people are behaving entrepreneurially, but instead it's difficult to prove that it was the entrepreneurial education that was causing this entrepreneurial behavior. It's also expensive and difficult to track people for so many years or even decades that is necessary for them to have the time to start a company. And it also makes it difficult to establish causal relations when it's so long time between the education and the entrepreneurial behavior. Also, with this strategy, there's a high risk for self-selection bias of entrepreneurial people choosing entrepreneurial education. Another problem with the theory of planned behavior is this link is often not taken into account. Behavior impacts attitudes backwards. So it's not only the education that impacts behavior, you also have a circular behavior, or circular relationship here, which is often not taken into account by this kind of method. But still, some useful results have been produced using the thought and action-based assessment strategies. Kåre Moberg, for example, has found that when focusing on cognitive skills in an educational intervention, that makes people want to become entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial. Whereas if you focus on the non-cognitive skills, it makes people more engaged in school and more motivated and interested in being in school. The problem is that there are also negative relations. Cognitive skills focus gives lower school engagement, and non-cognitive skills focus gives lower entrepreneurial intentions. This is early result, but we might have to think about what to do with this kind of results. Moberg also points out the importance of action-based teaching methods and the role of teacher support. Another study by Suitaris and colleagues has shown that the only educational factor affecting entrepreneurial attitudes and intentions is inspiration, as you can see here in the table. It's the only measure that shows strong correlations here. So this means that an educational intervention's capacity to make the students fall in love with an entrepreneurial career is very important. So these two were thought-based assessment strategy-based. Here we have an example from an action-based assessment strategy. And Lundqvist has found that surrogate entrepreneurship, which is when you let students or any person take care of someone else's idea, this has significant positive impact on venture performance, leading to ventures growing faster, generating more revenue, as you can see here. So letting students create value as part of education is not only good for learning, it's also good for generating financial value. So it's easy to criticize others, but do I have any alternative ideas of what to do when it comes to assessment? Well, I do have, and it's up to others to assess if those are good or not. My way of doing research has been looking at what happens during the education. What do people think? What do they do? What do they feel when they are in the education? This is based on tracking critical and emotional events triggering learning. And the idea here is to capture the learner's experiences, which is more or less formative assessment. And it leans on experience sampling as a method. Experience sampling was pioneered by a researcher called Csikszentmihalyi, who was using this method to come up with the flow theory, which has been pretty famous. And it's about giving very short surveys that people answer in the actual situation, maybe just 30 seconds. And this is a way to capture the subjective experience of the current situation. It's a mix between diary and survey, you could say. And you can use mobile smartphones in order to get this working. And it has been used in educational settings, such as here you can see what teenagers do in class. They spend time on leisure, maintenance, and productive, for example. I've been using this with a mobile app where people get to tell how they feel and why. And then I've been interviewing people based on these reported events and transcribing that. And I will show you some of the results that can come out of such a study. This is basically a new approach to assessing entrepreneurial education. Instead of looking at the entrepreneurial competencies, which are very difficult to assess, this is a strategy looking at the events that trigger entrepreneurial competencies. So this is an event-based assessment strategy. This is my empirical study that I've done, showing that when students do real stuff, it causes strong emotions that catalyze deep learning, leading to increased entrepreneurial self-efficacy, increased uncertainty and ambiguity tolerance. And the app reports that I got in from my students were fed into interviews, triggering discussion. And it showed that the most common reason for emotional events was interaction with the outside world. Second most important one was teamwork experience. As you can see here, presenting in front of others, uncertainty and confusion in learning environment were all other sources of emotional events for these students. And the learning outcomes looked like this. Self-efficacy, self-insight, entrepreneurial identity were quite common. And then it becomes like a matrix. These events cause these different kinds of learning with different frequency. And I've also done this study on secondary education, and there we could see similar things, events leading to learning, but different. You see here, for example, passion and identity did not happen as much on this shorter intervention here. And this leads to links such as these, strong links that I've talked about in previous parts of this video seminar series. And here is also how it looked at secondary education. We could see quite similar links in secondary education. And this allowed us to sketch out what happens in the black box of entrepreneurial learning. Educational design leading to emotional events, which in turn lead to entrepreneurial competencies developed. Okay, this was the last part of this video seminar series. Thank you very much for listening all the way to here, and let me know what you think. Send me a Twitter message, send me an email. I'm interested in finding out what you took away from this little video seminar series. Thank you very much. Bye.